This is my table saw, and specifically it's a Sherwood something, but the important points are that it is a 12-inch hybrid cabinet saw. This saw represents my very first ever big tool purchase when I started building this workshop about a year and a half ago. As a saw, it has some quirks and some little idiosyncrasies, but once you work those out and dial it in, it's actually a very good table saw. If you watched my last video, you might know that I've been on a bit of a mission to improve the dust collection efficiency here in the shop. In that video, I did a lot of upgrades and fixes to problems that I had, and some of those problems related to the table saw here. There is one area that I have not addressed yet and would love to solve or at least improve upon when it comes to dust collection, and that's right here above the blade on the table saw. Many table saws these days come with some sort of dust shroud or hood that goes above the blade, and my table saw was no exception to that. But unfortunately, like many things, this was an afterthought in relation to functionality and actually performance. And the reality is that these stock standard dust hoods, well, they're shit. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been spending some time doing some testing and designing and coming up with my own solution for a dust hood for my table saw. And this is the result. It's a replacement dust shroud that retrospectively fits to my table saw, and realistically it can fit to pretty much anybody's table saw if they have an applicable riving knife. It's a much smaller footprint, as you can see. It does use some clear windows so we can see the blade and we've got more visibility in terms of what we're cutting. It connects to a standard shop vac, so you can use a common adapter like this one, pop that into the slot at the top and connect your shop vac at the top here. So in this video, I'm going to chronicle how I made this and some of the challenges and problems that I faced in coming up with this design. And of course, we'll do some testing at the very end to see how well it performs. And lastly, if you're interested in making your own version of this particular dust shroud, then I'm going to include all of the laser cut files in the description below for absolutely free. So when it comes to custom over-the-blade dust collection solutions, there seem to be two main types that I found during my research. The most common one I saw was over-the-blade hoods, which were supported by some sort of boom or arm that either connected to the saw or was attached to a fixed surface like a shop wall. The second and most likely approach that I'm going to take is attaching something to the riving knife. So this is the full-size riving knife. As you can see, it sits above the blade. And we've got some mounting holes or mounting components here, which I think we can utilize in order to make something that slots on here and sits above the blade. Now, originally I was thinking about going down the boom arm path, but I've decided against that, mainly because I don't really want to have anything physically attached to that. And I don't want to force my table saw to be in a specific spot, a specific position. I want to be able to move it. So now that I've decided that I want to have something that's going to go over the head of the blade using the riving knife, the first thing that I'm going to try and do is just get an idea of the size and the geometry of the blade profile to understand where roughly I'm going to want some sort of shroud to sit. What kind of size is it going to be? So I've made this template, which is following a 12-inch geometry blade. This would certainly work for a 10-inch blade as well, so it will be interchangeable. And I do have some 10-inch blades, so I think that this will work fine. But if I look at that rough geometry here, I think I'm really happy with that size. So it's enough gap that obviously the blade's never going to hit the top of the guard, but I think the airflow will mean that this should channel really nicely. So I think the first prototype version that I make isn't really going to be about dust extraction. It's really just going to be about understanding the geometry of this shape, how heavy it's going to be, what it's going to look like, and whether or not some adjustments need to be made. So one of the first things that I did was to take my riving knife and use my bog standard scanner to scan the profile of the riving knife onto my computer. From there, I imported the image into Lightburn and traced around the knife so that I have a pretty good representation of the profile. I prefer to manually do tracing around for images. I do know that Lightburn has an image tracing option, but I find that this method isn't as accurate as doing it the manual way. It really doesn't take that long, and eventually I have an accurate one-to-one representation of my riving knife that's in Lightburn, and I can use that as a reference for my designs. Okay, after a bit of fluffing around, let's call this version number 1, or let's call this Mark 1. I know that this looks quite complete, but this is actually very, very rough. So let's take a look at what I've got here and maybe look at some of the things I think I need to change in terms of the geometry. Overall though, I'm happy with this form factor because I can still see the blade at the front here. So there's the blade just there. So I've still got some visibility on seeing the blade. I can see obviously the blade really well from both sides. And I think the dust collection at the back there might work okay, but I guess what we'll do is we'll do a prototype number 2 and we'll go from there. Okay, introducing Mark 2. As you can see, it's pretty much the same form factor still, so nothing's changed in that respect. We still have the dust collection at the top here. I've prettied it up a little bit using these button head zinc screws, so I think they look pretty good. I've ditched that slot and I've opted for just a clear straight through bolt that has these star knobs and it secures them on both sides, so it's very quick to now take it off. I just loosen this one completely off, I loosen this one, I take this one off, and I pull the this bolt out and then slide straight off. The other thing that I've added is in regards to how it grips the riving knife. Now this is very secure now. Now we've got 2 parts that are bolting onto the riving knife. However, I didn't like just the wood on metal contact that was here. So I've put in these EVA Foam inserts. So I lasered some EVA Foam inserts, and here's some of the offcuts here. But this EVA Foam is quite soft, but it's also a bit grippy, so it's got a good grip to it. So I've put that in between it, and I think that provides a nice grippy surface. So it's really gripping really well there, but still easy enough to slide on and off. So I think that's something that I will keep on for all of the models. But again, it's still using a little bit of squeeze friction, but it's now really difficult to push down. So I'm actually pushing that really hard and it's very difficult to move that. So this is the first prototype I'm actually going to test with the vacuum connected up and see how it performs and get an understanding if this arrangement with the dust collection at the rear of the blade is sufficient, or do we need to consider also moving to the front of it. So let's now do that. One of the key goals for any final design is I want to be able to use my current shop vac. I've sized the slot at the top to exactly fit the crevice tool that came with my shop vac, and it means that I should be able to attach it and unattach it really easily and really quickly. For these first few test cuts, I'm not concentrating too much on the dust collection performance just yet. This test is more about ensuring that there are no obvious issues with the form factor, that nothing is going to snag or get in the way of making a safe cut before I continue refining the design. Okay, so I finished just doing only a couple test cuts, but already this actually works pretty good. So, I mean, for some people they might say, all right, well, that's as far as I need to go. There's no major discernible dust that's been spit out here. It's almost completely clean here. There is a little bit that's come out the front here. If I have a look, just a little tiny bit, but I mean, that's tiny in regards to cutting up plywood. So overall, even as a prototype, I could actually call it a day here. But what I want to do now is maybe look at what happens if I move the dust collection to the front here. So I think I'm going to keep everything identical, but I want to look at maybe, rather than have this pointing here, maybe something that's here. So that might be a bit more of a challenge because we might need to have something to sort of catch in here, but we will look at doing a third prototype. So we'll go with a Mark 3. So this is the guts of Mark III, and I wanted to disassemble this and demonstrate what I'm going to change on the next iteration. So while I did test this, I did dismantle it, mostly because to show you where I think I kind of went wrong a little bit. So this is, again, same profile side. As you can see, we've got this sort of indentation here. And the reason why we've got this is that while on the Mark 1 and Mark 2, we've got the dust collection sort of hanging here, the profile that I've got for this one involves having that collection at the front. So this was initially what I had. So if we think that this is the profile here, so the dust collection hose was slotting in here, and the concept of the idea was that the blade's here, and then obviously as the dust comes up here, it gets sucked up into this component here. So that was what the internal profile would have looked like, or did look like. Now, what I discovered with this particular profile is that while the dust was being collected to some degree, a lot of it was sort of hitting the sides here and coming down. It wasn't actually shooting back up. So what I need to do for the fourth mark, I think, is change this angle, because right now, obviously, anything going this way is actually sort of being directed down rather than being directed up. So ideally, it actually should be something like that. It should actually be throwing it back up. So we've ditched this prototype, and here is the next prototype. So this is Mark IV. So a couple of changes that I've made. Obviously, you can see that the profile is a lot different now. So as you can see, we've got a much more aggressive profile now. So this is hopefully going to cause the dust that's coming this way to hit here and go up and be channeled towards the vacuum. So I think that'll make a huge difference. So for this particular version, I also shortened the amount of window sheeting that I've used here. So it doesn't need to go all the way following the entire profile. It only really needs to stop here, because obviously the saw blade stops somewhere here. So there was no reason for it to go all the way here. Additionally, I do want to note that this is not acrylic. So I'm sure there'll be people in the comments or initially thinking, oh, he's using acrylic sheeting or perspex. This is not perspex, this is not acrylic, this is actually PVC. So it's the same stuff that is used in the ducting and tubing here. So this stuff is incredibly soft. It routes really well, it cuts really well. It's stuff that I would not normally, if you were using acrylic or if you're using perspex, you wouldn't go and attack it with a router. So when it came to templating this, I did not need to worry about it shattering or anything like that, because it is not perspex, it's not acrylic. Right, so onto some testing, and I'll run a few cuts on the new prototype to see if placing the dust collection at the front instead makes things better. So we've just done a couple of test cuts on Mark IV, and there's definitely a differentiation I've noticed, and I think that we're going to have to go to another version. When I compare it to Mark III, which had the dust collection here, I'm noticing, as you can see, there's a lot more dust. There's not a lot, but there's more dust at the front here that I think has to do with the geometry of where I've got the dust collection here. So let me just come to the side here. And as you can see, we've got a very aggressive rake here, okay? And so we are catching everything that's coming here, but I've got a feeling, because this hovers above the blade and inside it, so the blade is actually underneath it, that things that are at the front of the blade maybe are escaping this way. Now, when you're doing a through cut, I assumed that shouldn't be a problem because it's being covered. There's nowhere for that dust to go, but clearly it's still finding a way out here. So what I think I need to do for Mark V is to push this forward and just have this out further. So Let's fire up the laser and make that happen. Now, for those of you thinking about making this for yourself, but are worried you'll only be able to do so if you have access to a laser, then don't fret. I'm going to include some template files you can print out so that you can make your own pattern templates for this. All you'll need is a router with a pattern bit and you'll be able to make this as well. Okay, so we've got all our components now ready to assemble. So I'll quickly go through the hardware that I'm going to be using to assemble the dust hood. So to bolt it all together or to fasten it all together, I'm going to be using these Chicago screws, or I guess they're also called furniture bolts or sex bolts or male-female bolts, however way you want to describe them. These ones are 30 millimeters long and are an M5 thread. You can, of course, use screws to screw this all together. The reason why I'm opting for something like this is that I want to be able to take it apart, and if I ever need to change maybe some of the internal dimensions of some of these parts, it means I can sort of swap them out. So again, a little bit of modularity when it comes to my dust hood. To ensure that the dust hood stays on the riving knife, I've got some M8 bolts here with a star knob on the end, so that simply slots into the end, and then an equivalent capped nut here with a star knob will fix it to the riving knife. All right, so let's move on to assembly. So some of this I will glue together just because it'll make assembly a little tiny bit easier, and they're a single component, so having these parts separately is unnecessary. So just going to use some CA glue. I'll add a list of all the hardware that I used for this. Again, you can use pretty much anything you want. Throw nuts, bolts, or screws at this. All of it, I'm sure, will be fine. Next, I'm going to glue the EVA foam to the ends. This is what helps to align the riving knife and to make sure that it's got a good connection between the riving knife and the dust hood. Now, just remember that the left and right sides are mirror images to each other, so make sure that you don't glue both sides the same way. To connect it all together, I'll start from one side and layer as I go, adding each component. Then it's just a simple case of tightening everything up using an appropriate Allen key. You can, of course, as mentioned, just use screws instead, and this would reduce the costs of making such a device even further. So Mark 5, we've done some test cuts, just a few, half a dozen or so, and we're still getting a little bit of front sawdust that's being thrown out the front here. It's not a lot. I mean, for half a dozen cuts, I mean, this is it, right? So, I mean, for most people, we can live with that, can't we? So this is not a big deal anymore, I don't think. So I think this is as good as it's getting, to be brutally honest with you. I mean, we could keep chasing after perfection, but I think with most dust collection systems, it's always going to be a compromise between, you know, functionality, performance. And if we compare this to nothing, well, I'm certain, well, nothing, this is definitely better than nothing. We'll do some final testing in the end, but there's one more thing I want to try and I want to add, and that's to have an adjustable shroud that goes down below onto the surface of the table when we're cutting thinner stuff, or more importantly, maybe we're doing some edge cutting. So I preempted that this might happen, and that's why you see these threaded inserts on each of the sides here. So I added those just in case I did want to make some sort of shroud that drops down, and that's exactly what I've done. So with the power of editing once again, so as you can see, I've added a shroud, a drop down shroud here. So the idea is that if I'm cutting something that's a little bit thinner and it doesn't, and the wood doesn't come all the way back out here, then I can adjust this to then drop down, and that way that meets the bottom of the table surface, and hopefully any dust that is going to go or be thrown out sideways is going to be channeled towards the front. Do I think it's going to pick it all up? No, I do not think so. I don't think there's any scenario where we can have the front here exposed and nothing come out here. But like I said before, a lot of this is about compromise. So as long as it picks up, you know, a significant component, or at least makes it easier to clean up afterwards, then we'll consider that a win. So the only way that we're going to know whether or not this solution works in any capacity whatsoever is to do some testing. But before we can begin, we need to clean the area of all sawdust so that we have a good baseline for comparison. The shop vac and my air blower make short work of this. Okay, so we've given the whole table saw a really good clean. We've blown out all the dust around, on, and on top of the table saw, so we're nice and clean here. And what we'll do now is we'll remove this and do a control test. So we'll do a whole bunch of cuts with some different materials, and then obviously assess how much dust we've got, and then repeat the process with the dust shroud, and obviously make some sort of conclusion or analysis or differentiation between the two. Now normally when I'm working in the shop I'm wearing my apron, but what I thought I would do is I'm wearing all black at the moment and I'm relatively dust free, but what I'll do is for the control test and the other test, I will just wear my normal clothes here and just see how much sawdust kind of gets thrown onto me, and see whether or not there's even just a differentiation between what is ejected onto myself. So for this control test, I'm going to cut 10 strips of form ply and a strip of pine. But before I do that, however, I need to remove the dust hood. This is a good opportunity to demonstrate how quick and easy it is to remove the hood from my riving knife. Just loosen one bolt, remove another one, and it slides straight off. Okay folks, so that was the control test, and it's only 10 cuts plus some pine, but I mean, the table's covered. What I really noticed is that there's a lot that gets thrown sideways. So, I mean, I'm sure it's got something to do with the vortices on the blade, but I mean, there's a lot that just gets thrown out sideways. So, it's not so much that there's much on this side, it's just all of this side. So there's a whole bunch of sawdust here. If I look at the front, we've got a lot on the ground, we've got a lot on the side here, and a lot even just in here. So that was only 10 cuts. So obviously as you work on a project and you make maybe hundreds of cuts, you know, this all has to go somewhere, doesn't it? So it's not going inside the table, it's all above. And I have to mention that during the control, I still had all my normal dust collection stuff on. So that was still on, and that was still on, and obviously I had all my PPE gear on. So as you can see, yeah, it's pretty messy. So the next thing to do, well actually, sorry, there is one last thing to do, and that's to check how much dust came onto me. So you know the old saying that a picture speaks 1,000 words. So as you can see, holy moly, just 10 cuts. So what, 11 cuts, 10 cuts of form ply, 1 cut of pine. And this is what my t-shirt looks after just those cuts. So this is, yeah, this is actually shocking. You don't realize how much dust is actually being injected onto you till you see something like this. I want to see if you can get a better look at this. So this is my t-shirt. So as you can see, pretty well covered. Okay, so I guess the next thing to do is to basically do a reset. We will clean all of this again, put the hood back on, and do the same test again. So 10 cuts, some pine, etc. And hopefully the outcome will be a lot cleaner shop. So let's see how we go. To put the dust hood on is just as fast as taking it off. We slide it onto the riving knife and slot the bolt in the groove. We then insert our bolt through the dust hood and the riving knife. To make sure it's straight and perpendicular to the table, I like to lower the blade till the hood is touching the surface, and then we can tighten the bolts. The last step, of course, is to attach our shop vac. Okay, so I've cleaned everything again, and it's time to do the second test, but this time with our custom dust hood, and we'll see if there's a major improvement. But based on just those 10 cuts before, I'm actually really shocked at just how much dust is generated in only a handful of cuts. So let's fingers crossed see that this one does a lot better. Okay, let's take you for a little trip here. So, I've just finished cutting everything, and let's do a quick comparison. So already, just on the table here, especially on the left here, there's not much at all. If I pull all this together, that's basically it. So it's a tiny amount of sawdust on the left here. What I was seeing on the original one is just so much sawdust being flung to the left. So even on that last cut, I lowered this guard down, so I reckon that helped a lot in making sure that it kept the dust inside there. So I mean, yes, is there some still? Of course there is. Don't be silly, you know, we're never going to get everything, but I mean, if I pull together everything that kind of has sput out, you know, that's not a lot. That's what we're working with here, isn't it? So overall, it's definitely an improvement. If I look to the left here, if I look in the gullets, actually I forgot to clean out these gullets, but oh no, I did clean these out. So there's not a lot in there. More important, let's look at the floor. So there's just really nothing. There's a few specks down the bottom here, in comparison, so it's much tidier. And I think the final nail in the coffin, let's look at how much sawdust is on me. So let's have a look at how much dust collected on me, and as you can see, I think we can put that in the win column, because that is a significant reduction in how much sawdust is being ejected onto me. And just to very clearly demonstrate the difference here, here is a freeze frame from both tests. On the left is obviously no dust hood, and of course on the right is with. So I always wondered why there was so much sawdust at the front of my saw. I could never understand, because obviously the blade's at the top here, how is it getting on the bottom? But it's very clear that there's a lot of dust, or a lot of sawdust, that gets ejected through the front of the blade. And it's probably most likely as the wood gets passed through the blade, the last part of when it ejects from the wood, and that's been spun out. But being able to capture some of that, yeah, that's definitely a difference. I think we can all agree on that. So in the end, was it worth it? And 100% yes, it was. Honestly, I did not realize just how much dust was being ejected into the shop due to a lack of a dust collection device on the blade. As an asthmatic, this means that there's going to be less dust in the air, less dust that I'm breathing in. My air filtration unit doesn't have to work as hard in order to clean the air, and overall my shop's going to be a lot cleaner. If you're interested in trying this solution for yourself, or perhaps maybe even modifying or improving upon my design, then I'm going to leave links to the laser cut files or templates in the description below. A huge super thanks goes out to Scott RF900R, and to channel members Mario at the Woodfather and James from Fix It Fingers. Thank you so much for your generosity. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.